أعجبك الفيديو لا تنسى الإعجاب والاشتراك في القناة.
August 2nd, 1990, Saddam Hussein's forces crashed through the defences of oil-rich Kuwait. In fear of an Iraqi invasion into Saudi Arabia, the United States and her coalition allies poured into the Arabian Peninsula to form a deterrent that would be known as Desert Shield. The result was a series of diplomatic talks, negotiations and counter-negotiations that rapidly declined into a no-hope situation. On August the 17th, 1991, Desert Shield became Desert Storm. The conflict was witnessed by millions through the eye of CNN and the BBC, showing propaganda of the systematic eradication of Saddam's forces by a coalition far superior in technological, political, and economic power. However, what was little known was that from the outset the war was engineered, controlled, and manipulated by an elite group. A group which had created the illusion of a man with power, at the head of a million-strong army, on the verge of going nuclear. A man who had gained control over 1/5 of the world's oil overnight. However, in reality, he was merely a pawn, in amongst many pawns, just a puppet in a grand master plan, with the Gulf War as a well-orchestrated stepping stone. The the orchestrators of the war were by no means strangers to controlling major world events. In fact, they have done so for centuries. From the shadows, they have engineered every major war, revolution, and recession. They control everything you read, everything you hear, and everything you see. They have managed to indoctrinate an entire populace to their way of thinking and have infiltrated key positions in places of authority. And it is from the shadows that they have created a new political order, a new economic order, and more sinister, a new religious order. Their ultimate aim is total global domination, and they will stop at nothing to reach their goal. The goal that was outlined in a speech given by former President of the United States, George Bush.
What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order.
However, the origins of this global plan were not created in the offices of the White House. In reality, their roots lay in another war. This time, the year is 1095, and the place, Clermont, France.
En el nombre del Padre, del Hijo y del Espíritu Santo.
11th century Europe was ruled by the Church, which held a firm grip on the hearts and minds of the people. This power enabled Pope Urban II to wage war on the Muslim Caliphate and crusade in what he called a War of the Cross to recapture the land of Jerusalem. It had been under Muslim rule since the year 637, but in 1099 this rule was brought to a bloody and sudden end. In the name of the cross, women were raped and murdered. Children were put to the sword, and it is said that blood ran in the streets knee-high to the horses. Out of this land of bloodshed and terror, a group of men arose. Men that would stop at nothing to get what they wanted, no matter what the cost. 20 years after Jerusalem was taken, the Dome of the Rock was seized by a group of warrior monks calling themselves the Knights of the Temple of Solomon, or more simply, the Knights Templars. In Jerusalem, the Templars began to deviate further and further away from the practices of Christianity. They learnt the secret arts of the Kabbalah, an ancient form of Jewish magic, along with its dark rites and rituals. The Jews had learnt the arts from the pagans of ancient Egypt during the times of enslavement to the Pharaoh and developed them into Babylon at the time of Nebuchadnezzar. In 1307, King Philippe of France arrested them for charges of denial of Christ, homosexuality, and idol worship, as well as magic. In 1314, Pope Clement V declared all Templars as heretics to Christianity, ordering all their properties to be seized. Their leader, Jacques de Molay, was captured and burnt to the stake. The Templars were cornered, and just when it seemed they were finished forever, a glimmer of hope arose from a seemingly certain end. They were to find a safe haven as well as an ally. But not in France. In fact, in a country in a desperate struggle for independence against the English, the country of Scotland. For some, Scotland's hope of independence had died with the death of William Wallace. However, to the King of Scotland, Robert the Bruce, the arrival of the Templars gave him a new secret weapon. Their experience, gained over 200 years of fighting the mighty armies of Islam, had made them expert in combat and warfare, and more than a match for any army brought before them. In 1314, the Templars, allied with Robert the Bruce and his army, took to the fields of Bannockburn in the long-awaited showdown with the English. Robert the Bruce's foresight paid off. The 25,000-strong English army suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of only 6,500 men. The dream of an independent Scotland had finally been achieved. The Templars had brought themselves back from the brink of destruction, and never again would they allow themselves to be destroyed. This time, they would control the country by controlling its kings, and in order to preserve their secret order, the Templars would have to die, or more precisely, the name would have to die. The Templars who had escaped Europe were finally laid to rest in Roslin Chapel, Scotland, which stands to this day as sign of their presence in Britain. Their descendants became the true power of Scotland. In 1603, the death of Queen Elizabeth I left England without an heir to the throne. By virtue of descent, King James V of Scotland became King of England. In doing so, Scotland and England joined to form a new kingdom, and the power that the Templars held over Scotland spread to give them a firm grip on the whole of Great Britain. For over 100 years, the Templars concealed their activities, fading into the background until they were little known and little remembered. However, they did not cease to keep a firm grip on Britain. All the time they were planning, regrouping, and infiltrating positions of power in all corners of the kingdom. In 1717, the Templars made their reappearance in Europe. They had grown in both number and strength, and were now ready to coin a new identity, free from their reputation of the past, and given credibility by none other than the monarchy and aristocracy of England. And the name they chose for themselves was a name that would be known by many, but understood by a few. This new name, the Freemasons. The new identity and the grandeur of its members afforded the Masons with respect and dignity. The first royal member of the Freemasons was Frederick, Prince of Wales. The latest members include Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, and consort to the current Queen of England, Elizabeth II, who herself is a grand patron to the Masons. However, behind closed doors, the Freemasons were free to indulge in the secret rites and rituals handed down to them by their ancestors, and these became the basis of their levels of membership, called degrees. The Freemasons were not content with power in Britain alone. Their ambitions were far greater. In the years to come, the world would witness Europe and America being plagued by wars and revolutions, each more devastating than the other. However, these would not be as commonly believed, the spontaneous effects of a downtrodden people, but in fact schemes created by the exclusive few, driven by hunger for absolute power. All this would take place from the very country from which they had fled centuries earlier, and would come with a base for their global domination.
Put a name to the conspiracy that's come down to us through the ages, that some call the Illuminati, some other people call it other things. But I think if you boil it down to its purest, simplest form, you would identify it essentially as Freemasonry. Now that might surprise some of you, but understand that Masonry has been around a long, long time. It may not have always been called Freemasonry, but Masons itself brag about the fact that their first Mason was Tubal-Cain. Now, Tubal-Cain, if you know your Bible, was the seventh man from Adam by way of Cain, and he was the guy that invented metalworking. And he is supposedly the first Mason. Now that's pretty far back to start a conspiracy. Then of course you have the flood. After the flood, the Masons say that the first Mason was Nimrod. Now of course we all know who Nimrod was. He's the guy that helped build the Tower of Babel. That's pretty good Masonry. He was the person who basically had the idea for a one world government. He wanted to start a United Nations. He had all these great ideas, you know, one world government, all this kind of stuff, new world order. And God had other ideas. And God came down and he cast confusion and changed the languages of the people. So they went and scattered abroad on the earth. That basically tells us what God thinks about the United Nations. This caused the conspiracy to go underground. And for centuries it existed in various forms. And if you look in the books, the literature of Masonry, you will find that Masonry says it is the direct linear descendant from the ancient mystery religions, from the ancient fertility cults. Now what does that mean? That sounds sort of exciting and mysterious and exotic.
القارة الأمريكية يعني اكتشفت عند وصول كولومبوس إليها سنة 1492 وظلت يعني سنوات طويلة غير يعني مستعمرة من الأوروبيين. والحقيقة أن يعني الفضل في استيطان القارة الأمريكية يعود ليس إلى الحكومات الأوروبية. يعني فكرة استيطان القارة الأمريكية البكر فكرة نبتت في ذهن الحركات السرية وهي التي تتولى تطبيقها في الفعل. وكانت فلسفة طبعا الماسونية والحركات السرية التي هي جسم كبير ومتشعب في أوروبا وفي تاريخ الغرب يعني وفي حالة صراع مستديم مع سلطاته ومع القوى العقائدية والتاريخية والملكية فيه. كانت فكرة هذه الحركات أن القارة الأمريكية أرض بكر وخالية من العوائق، فليس فيها سلطات وليس لها تاريخ وليس فيها عقائد وليس هناك حواجز تحول دونه بين من يسيطر عليها وبين أن يشكل مجتمعا جديدا بأفكاره هو وبأهدافه هو ولغاياته هو، وأن يسير هذا المجتمع أو هذا العالم الذي سوف يتكون إلى حيث يريد. يعني يختصر ذلك عبارة يعني تشيع في الأدبيات الماسونية هي أنهم فطنوا إلى أن القارة الأمريكية هي التي ستحسم مصير العالم. من يسيطر على هذه الأرض البكر ويتمكن من إقامة عالم فيها بقواعده وقانونه ولغاياته هو الذي سيتمكن مع الوقت من السير بالعالم إلى ما يريد. فطبعا لا نريد الاستطراد في كلام النظري، لكن نقول تاريخيا ان اول عملية استيطان للقارة الامريكية كانت سنة 1587. هذه المحاولة رائدة والتي هي اول عملية استيطان تاريخية للقارة الامريكية. الذي قام بها وهو السير ويلتر ريد، كان احد كبار اعضاء حركة الروزيكريشن، وهذه الحركة هي توأم الماسونية ولكنها اشياء اكثر منها انغلاقا واكثر سرية وهكذا.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, A world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order.
Satan does have plans for a one-world government, and you have to control the money.
Illuminized Masonic symbolism is all over America. On the back of the dollar bill on the left-hand side above the pyramid it says Annuit Coeptus, which means our enterprise is now a success, or a crowned success. So what enterprise does it mean? Well, Novus Ordo Seclorum near the bottom. Novus meaning new, Ordo is order, Seclorum is where we get our word secular, meaning the world. So it means new order of the world, simply new world order. So what it's saying is the New World Order is now a crowned success. This was put on the dollar bill in 1934. 1934 is when the Federal Reserve took total control of the United States monetary system. The Fed is essentially controlled by two Illuminati bloodlines, the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason, placed the seal on the dollar bill. Roosevelt was also in the Order of the Nobles of the Mystic Shrine, known for its satanic rituals. The pyramid has 13 steps. In fact, the number 13 is on the bill everywhere. 13 leaves on the olive branch, 13 berries, 13 stripes on the shield, 13 arrows, 13 stars, 13 letters on E pluribus unum, and 13 letters in Annuit Coeptus. Now some people believe 13 is on the bill due to the 13 colonies, but dig a little bit deeper and you'll find the real answer. 13 also represents the 13 top Illuminati families that we trace back to the late 18th century and the early 19th century. He was credible, and that's why he was framed by the government and thrown in a cage. 1776 is in Roman numerals near the bottom. Some think it's because of the founding of the country. Another case of subliminal, indirect, reverse psychological propaganda. 1776 is when the Illuminati was formed. The New World Order. Another striking fact is that the eagle has 32 feathers on the right wing, the number of ordinary degrees of the Scottish Rite. There's 33 feathers on the left wing, representing the 33rd degree. The tail has 9 feathers, which represents the 9th degree of the York Rite. The eagle itself is a prominent icon in Masonry, extensively used in the Scottish Rite.
Many of the United States presidents have blood relations with each other. The Bush lineage has blood ties to a great number of former presidents. George Washington, Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses Grant, Rutherford Hayes, James Garfield, Grover Cleveland, Teddy Roosevelt, William Taft, Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover, Franklin Roosevelt, Richard Nixon, and Gerald Ford. Baryon points out in his work that Bush is closely related to every European monarch on and off the throne, and has kinship with every member of Britain's royal family. Bush's family tree can be documented as far back as the early 15th century. He has a direct descent from Henry III and from Henry VIII's sister Mary Tudor. He is also descended from Charles II of England. And we also find that George W. Bush is a direct descendant of Godfrey the Bullion. Godfrey was the first king of Jerusalem after he recaptured it from the Saracens, which was the name for the Islamic faith during the Middle Ages. It is interesting to note that the current occupation of the United States in the Middle East was re-established by the same family, George Bush Sr. in 1991, and again by George Bush Jr. in 2003. George Bush Jr. is then found to be a cousin to both opposing candidates of his 2 terms in office, Al Gore and John Kerry. Democratic President Barack Obama also has blood ties with George W. Bush, as well as Gerald Ford, Lyndon Johnson, Harry Truman, James Madison, and the British Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill. On the opposing side of the 2008 presidential ballot, John McCain is descended from Robert the Bruce, King William I of Scotland, and also Godfrey the Bullion.
In either of those first 2 books, though, who knew you and Dick Cheney cousins?
You know, listen, I don't think I'm going to family reunion. I don't know how I'll be greeted.
We all know his father, but what about his cousins? feet away from the presidency, is actually a blood relation. He's President Bush's 9th cousin once removed. Cheney's cousin Barack Obama is also Bush's 11th cousin. Lincoln was President Bush's 7th cousin 5 times removed. And Bush shared more than just a ballot with John Kerry. That's right, they're 9th cousins twice removed. Trace the family tree far enough, and you get Madonna, Celine Dion, and Tom Hanks.
Christine, you've heard the adage politics makes strange bedfellows. Apparently politics also makes for strange relations. Thanks to the New England Historic Genealogical Society, we now know the presidential candidates are related to a host of famous and historic figures.
In this primary campaign.
I opposed this war in 2002.
But do you know their relatives? Obama is distantly related to 6 presidents: George W. and George H.W. Bush, Gerald Ford, Lyndon Johnson, Harry S. Truman, and James Madison. Obama's family tree also includes Sir Winston Churchill and Civil War General Robert E. Lee.